Nathaniel Stone was one of the most important men in New York City. At just 41, he had built a real estate empire that gave him everything most people could only dream of: money, power, and influence. He was tall, always dressed in elegant suits, and had sharp blue eyes with a hint of gray at his temples, making him look like a perfect picture of success. But despite all of this, Nathaniel felt lonely. Even at the grandest parties and most exclusive dinners, he often felt like he didn't belong, as if there was something missing. One crisp autumn morning, the sunlight bathed Manhattan in golden hues, making the tall skyscrapers shine. Nathaniel arrived at the Metropolitan Museum of Art for an important board meeting. As always, he was 15 minutes early. He walked through the revolving doors, and his expensive Italian shoes echoed on the shiny marble floors. Glancing at his fancy watch, a Patek Philippe, he saw he had some time to spare. Instead of heading straight to the meeting, he wandered into the Egyptian wing of the museum. That's when something caught his attention and changed his day completely. In front of a group of teenagers, a woman with curly black hair, tied into a neat bun, was speaking passionately. Her voice carried through the hall like music, full of energy and warmth. She pointed to the ancient hieroglyphics on a stone wall, explaining how they told a love story from thousands of years ago. Her brown eyes sparkled as she spoke, and the teens listened closely, though some looked a little bored. Nathaniel couldn't take his eyes off her. She wasn't just beautiful. There was something about her that made the whole room come alive. He noticed 5 boys standing around her. They all looked alike, so Nathaniel guessed they must be her children. Mom, the youngest boy, no older than 8, tugged on her skirt. "Can we go see the mummies now?" "Not yet, Julian," the woman replied with a kind smile. "History first, then mummies. Be patient, darling." Nathaniel found himself smiling. She was teaching and mothering at the same time, balancing both roles with ease. He was so drawn in by her enthusiasm and warmth that he forgot about his meeting entirely. Instead, he followed her and the kids, keeping a respectful distance, listening to her stories about ancient Egypt. The oldest boy, a teenager of about 16, noticed Nathaniel watching them. "Mom," he whispered, leaning in close, "there's a man following us." His tone was protective, his gaze sharp. The woman turned to face Nathaniel. She didn't look scared or angry, just curious. "Can I help you with something, sir?" she asked, her voice calm but firm. Nathaniel felt his heart race. He wasn't used to feeling nervous, but something about her made him feel self-conscious. "I'm Nathaniel Stone," he said quickly. "I'm sorry if I startled you. I didn't mean to follow you. It's just, your explanation of Egyptian history is fascinating." Her expression softened, and a smile lit up her face. "I'm Charlotte Anderson," she said. "I teach history at the Bronx High School of Science. These are my boys, Elijah, Oliver, Zara, Luna, and Julian." She pointed to each child as she said their names. Nathaniel studied them more closely now. Elijah, the oldest, stood tall and protective, keeping an eye on Nathaniel. Oliver, about 14, had a serious look on his face, like he was analyzing everything. Zara and Luna, 12-year-old twins, exchanged whispers and giggled at a private joke. Julian, the youngest, clung to his mother's skirt but peeked curiously at Nathaniel. "Nice to meet you all," Nathaniel said, genuinely smiling. He surprised himself with how relaxed he felt. "Would it be all right if I joined you for coffee? The museum has a great cafe, and I'd love to hear more about Egyptian history." Charlotte hesitated. She glanced at Elijah, who gave her a subtle nod, still wary but less tense. "All right," she said after a moment. "The boys could use a break, and I never turned down a good cup of coffee." They walked to the cafe together. Charlotte organized her kids with practiced ease, handing out napkins, making sure everyone had hot chocolate, and stopping crumbs from spilling. Nathaniel watched, amazed at how smoothly she handled everything. She didn't rush or raise her voice, but somehow managed to keep all 5 boys in line. Oliver, always curious, broke the silence. "So, Mr. Blackwood," he began, his sharp eyes fixed on Nathaniel. Why are you at the museum on a Tuesday morning? Oliver? Charlotte scolded gently, but Nathaniel smiled. It's a good question, he said. I'm actually supposed to be in a meeting. I'm on the museum's board of directors. I help fund some of the exhibits. Zara grinned and whispered to Luna, Must be nice to have that much money. Luna nudged him and hissed, Don't be rude. Charlotte shook her head with a small smile. We're still working on manners, she said apologetically. Nathaniel laughed. I don't mind. I actually like how honest you all are. It's refreshing. As they chatted, Nathaniel learned more about Charlotte's life. She was a single mother, raising 5 boys on her own. Her husband had passed away 6 years ago while serving in the military. It's been hard, she admitted, resting a hand on Julian's shoulder, but my boys are my strength. They're the reason I keep going. Nathaniel looked around the table. Elijah sat a little straighter, clearly proud of his mom. Oliver's face grew serious, and he glanced away, trying to hide his emotions. Zara and Luna scooted closer to Charlotte, leaning against her for comfort. Julian smiled up at her, too young to fully understand the weight of her words, but clearly feeling safe. You're incredible, Nathaniel said sincerely. I run a company, but I don't think I could do half of what you do. Charlotte laughed softly. Laughed softly? You'd be surprised, she said. You just learned to dance with chaos. Eventually, it was time for Charlotte and the boys to leave. We still have to see the mummies before heading home, she announced, and then there's homework waiting for us. Nathaniel felt a pang of disappointment. He didn't want the moment to end. Summoning his courage, he asked, Can I have your phone number? I'd love to stay in touch. Charlotte hesitated again, her eyes meeting Elijah's. The teenager gave her a small nod of approval. Finally, she scribbled her number on a napkin. Just know, she warned, my life is very different from yours. Don't expect fancy dinners or conversations about stock markets. Nathaniel smiled, folding the napkin carefully. That's exactly why I'm interested, he said. Your life feels real, authentic. Weeks later, Nathaniel and Charlotte were on their 3rd date. Charlotte had chosen a small Italian restaurant called Mama Rosa's. It wasn't the kind of place Nathaniel usually visited. There were no chandeliers or fancy menus, just cozy checkered tablecloths and the delicious smell of homemade pasta. This place is special, Charlotte said as they sat down. I've been coming here for years with the boys. Rosa, the owner, practically watched them grow up. As if on cue, a cheerful older woman with gray hair appeared at their table. Charlotte, my dear, and who's this handsome gentleman? She asked with a twinkle in her eye. Charlotte introduced Nathaniel, and Rosa beamed. Ah, I've heard about you. The boys told me all about their mom's new friend. Nathaniel raised an eyebrow at Charlotte. The boys talk about me? More than you'd think, Charlotte admitted, laughing. Julian won't stop talking about how you promised to take him to the Natural History Museum. Oliver's curious about your job, and even Elijah has warmed up to you. They ordered their food, and the conversation flowed easily. Nathaniel found himself sharing stories from his childhood, how he had grown up in a big house, but always felt alone. Charlotte opened up about the challenges of balancing her career and motherhood. You know what amazes me, Nathaniel said, looking at her thoughtfully. The way you turn every challenge into a lesson for your boys. You're raising them to be strong, kind, and thoughtful. Charlotte smiled, but looked serious. Nathaniel, she said, what are you looking for in this relationship? Nathaniel wasn't expecting Charlotte's question, but he knew he had to be honest. I want something real, he said, leaning forward. For the first time in my life, I've met someone who makes me rethink everything I thought was important. You and your kids, you have something that money can't buy. Charlotte looked at him seriously. You know my life comes with 5 extra pieces, right? I'm not just Charlotte the teacher, I'm Charlotte the mom of 5 boys. They're still dealing with losing their dad. Every choice I make affects them. Nathaniel nodded, feeling sure of himself. That's why I'm here. I want to be part of this family, like if you'll let me. Not as a replacement, but as someone who wants to grow and learn with you. Before Charlotte could answer, their food arrived, but something had changed between them. They shared pasta and stories. Nathaniel talked about how last week he stood up for a project to help people get affordable homes during a big meeting. The old guys on the board couldn't believe it, he chuckled. But for the first time, I felt like I was using my power for something good. Charlotte smiled, a little proud and a little worried. You're changing, Nathaniel Stone, she said softly. For the better, I hope, he replied, touching her hand. As they walked through the busy streets after dinner, Nathaniel stopped under a street lamp. I want to get to know your boys better, he said, looking at her. Not just from stories you tell or quick meetings. I want to be part of their lives. Charlotte studied him for a while. That's tricky, she said. My kids aren't a project or an experiment. I know, Nathaniel said quickly. That's why I want to do this the right way. Maybe we could start slow, like a family dinner at your home where everyone feels comfortable. Charlotte smiled. Okay, she agreed, but just so you know, dinners at our house are crazy. There are arguments about video games, debates over homework, and sometimes even pillow fights. I can't wait, Nathaniel said, feeling excited and nervous. Nathaniel stood outside Charlotte's apartment holding a basket of gifts. He took a deep breath before ringing the doorbell. Inside, he heard footsteps and voices. The door opened, and Julian, the youngest, smiled at the basket. Mom, Nathaniel brought presents, he yelled. Julian, manners. Charlotte's voice called from somewhere inside. Elijah, the oldest, appeared next. He looked at Nathaniel, noticing how nervous he was, and softened a little. Come in, Elijah said, opening the door. But watch out for the twin science projects. They might explode. Nathaniel stepped into a warm, lively home. Books were everywhere. A chess game sat unfinished on the table, and school projects covered the walls. It was messy but felt cozy. Charlotte came out of the kitchen wearing an apron with tomato sauce stains. Sorry about the mess, she said, tying her hair back with a colorful scarf. It's end of semester mode. It's perfect, Nathaniel said honestly, handing her the basket. I brought some things I thought your boys might like. Julian got an archaeology kit with digging tools. Oliver, the second oldest, received books on ancient buildings. The twins, Zara and Luna, got advanced science kits. And after some hesitation, Elijah accepted a laptop that Nathaniel knew he needed for school. You didn't have to, Charlotte began, but Nathaniel stopped her. I wanted to. Not because of how much they cost, but because I listened when you told me about their interests. The room relaxed after that. The twins pulled Nathaniel to see their science project, a solar system model with moving gears. Oliver flipped through his books, asking Nathaniel questions about ancient structures. Meanwhile, Nathaniel tried to help Charlotte in the kitchen, though he mostly got in the way. He noticed Elijah teaching Julian how to use the archaeology tools. He's a great big brother, Nathaniel said softly. Charlotte smiled. Elijah took on a lot after Henry died. Sometimes I worry he grew up too fast. How did you all handle losing him? Nathaniel asked. One day at a time, Charlotte sighed. But I'm proud of them. They can still smile and believe in good things. At dinner, everyone squeezed around the small table. Nathaniel sat between Julian and Zara. He watched in awe as Charlotte managed the food, the conversations, and even an argument over garlic bread. Nathaniel, Oliver asked through a mouthful of spaghetti, have you really been to all those places in the books? Most of them, Nathaniel replied. But you know what? I never really appreciated them before. I was too busy with work. That's sad, Julian said. Mom says you have to stop and notice the beautiful things in life. Your mom is very wise, Nathaniel said, sharing a smile with Charlotte. Later, Elijah made a sharp comment about rich people never working hard. The room went quiet. Nathaniel surprised everyone by agreeing. You're right, Elijah. I've had a lot of advantages, but I'm learning now that money can't teach you the most important things, like having a family like yours. Elijah stared at him, then gave a small nod. It wasn't much, but it felt big. After dinner, Nathaniel helped clean up while the boys played Uno, laughing and shouting. Charlotte smiled at him. You did well tonight, especially with Elijah. I'm learning, Nathaniel said, stepping closer, and I want to keep learning. Before Charlotte could reply, the twins started yelling, Mom, Zara is cheating again! Charlotte laughed, touching Nathaniel's arm. Welcome to real life, Mr. Blackwood. Then she left to settle the argument. Nathaniel stayed behind in the kitchen, feeling something he'd never felt before, a deep happiness. In that noisy apartment full of love, he felt like he'd found something priceless, a real family. Back at his office on Monday, Nathaniel couldn't stop smiling, thinking about dinner. His sister Beatrice walked in. So the rumors are true, she said. You're dating a teacher from the Bronx? Nathaniel frowned. Beatrice, don't start. I'm not against it, she said. I'm just worried. People on the board are upset. You've skipped meetings for this family. Nathaniel's phone buzzed with a text from Zara. I got an A+ on my science project. Thanks for helping with the gears. Nathaniel smiled at the message. Beatrice noticed. You really love them, she said. I do, Nathaniel replied. Charlotte and her boys have taught me more about life than anything else. Before Beatrice could respond, Richard Montgomery, a board member, barged into the office. He threw a magazine on the desk. On the cover was a picture of Nathaniel with Charlotte and the boys under a dramatic headline, Nathaniel Stone's New Life, From Riches to Romance. 3 clients canceled contracts because of this. Montgomery fumed. Your personal life is ruining our business. Nathaniel stood tall. If they don't want to work with us because of who I care about, maybe they're not the kind of partners we need. Blackwood was a big company that was proud of its long history, but Nathaniel thought some of its ways weren't fair anymore. Blackwood stands for excellence and tradition, said Richard, one of the bosses. Nathaniel laughed a little and said, You mean it stands for being unfair and keeping people out? Richard didn't like that and said, You're making a big mistake, and you'll regret it. Then he and some others left the room angrily. Beatrice, Nathaniel's sister, was worried. He can cause trouble, she said. I know, Nathaniel said as he picked up his phone. He had to warn Charlotte before she found out from someone else. Charlotte, Nathaniel's wife, was busy teaching a class when Nathaniel texted her. She called him back during her break. Have the boys seen it? She asked, sounding worried. I don't know, Nathaniel said. I'm so sorry. I should have known this would happen. Charlotte sighed. Elijah texted me. He said someone at school showed him the magazine. He's not happy. Nathaniel felt bad. Can I come over later so we can talk together as a family? Yes, Charlotte said after thinking. But Nathaniel, this is only the beginning, isn't it? Probably, he admitted, but I won't let anyone hurt you or the boys. That day, Nathaniel was very busy with meetings and phone calls. By the time he got to Charlotte's apartment, everyone was tense. Elijah, the oldest, was sitting quietly, looking upset. The twins were whispering in a corner. Oliver was playing a board game with Julian to cheer her up, and Charlotte looked tired. They called me a gold digger, Charlotte said quietly when she and Nathaniel were alone in the kitchen. Some teachers said it in the lounge, like I don't deserve to be with you. Nathaniel hugged her. We'll get through this together, he promised. Elijah, standing in the doorway, spoke bitterly. You can leave any time and go back to your fancy life, but we have to stay here and deal with this. Nathaniel looked at him and said, You're right to be mad, Elijah, but you're wrong about one thing. My world isn't just fancy anymore. It's here with all of you, and I'll fight for it. Julian ran into the kitchen, breaking the heavy moment. Can we order pizza? She asked. Oliver said, We always get pizza on bad days. Everyone laughed a little, and Charlotte ordered pizza. Nathaniel realized this was only the first of many tough days, but as he looked at his family, he knew they were worth it. That weekend, they went to a fancy party at the Plaza Hotel. The big room sparkled with lights and everyone dressed up. Charlotte wore a beautiful blue dress, and the boys wore suits, looking very grown up. Nathaniel could tell Charlotte was nervous as she held his hand tightly. "Remember," she told the boys, "stand tall. You don't have to prove anything to anyone." The boys straightened their shoulders, and Nathaniel felt proud of them. The past few weeks had been tough. Oliver had to move seats in class because kids were mean. The twins weren't invited to a birthday party. Elijah even got into a fight sticking up for his mom and was suspended for 3 days. At the party, a fancy lady named Patricia came over. She smiled, but it wasn't a nice smile. "Nathaniel, what a surprise to see your new family here," she said. Julian, the youngest, didn't notice her tone and said, "Your necklace is pretty. It looks like the ones in the Egyptian museum, right, Mom?" Charlotte smiled and said, "Yes, it's inspired by ancient Egyptian jewelry." Patricia was surprised. "You know about that?" "Our mom is an expert," Zara said proudly. "She's writing about how Egyptian jewelry influenced modern designs." Nathaniel smiled as Patricia didn't know what to say. The boys impressed many people at the party. The twins talked about science, and Oliver shared smart thoughts about the hotel's design. But trouble came when Richard Montgomery, who didn't like Nathaniel, showed up. "Nathaniel," he said loudly, "the board is voting tomorrow about whether you should stay as CEO. I thought you should know." Everyone at the table went quiet. Elijah clenched his fists, but it was Luna who spoke first. "Why do you want to take his job?" Richard smirked. "Kids don't understand business." "But we understand fairness," Zara said. "We learned about prejudice and ethics at school." Oliver added, "Making unfair decisions isn't just wrong. It's illegal." Richard turned red. "How dare you? How dare you threaten my family?" Nathaniel cut in, his voice firm. "You want a fight? You'll get one." Charlotte added calmly, "Maybe we should talk about how you've blocked projects for diversity for years." Elijah looked at his mom with admiration. Julian held Nathaniel's hand and said, "Mom says bad people only have power if you let them." Richard stepped back, realizing he'd lost. Around the room, people were recording the scene with their phones. Later, when the family rested in a private room, Elijah asked, "Are you going to lose your company because of us?" Nathaniel shook his head. "If I lose, it'll be because of unfairness, not because of you. And I'd rather lose everything than lose your respect." Charlotte hugged him. "We'll fight for you too," she said. "As a family," Oliver added. The twins joked about making a science project to distract everyone at the vote, and everyone laughed, easing the tension. The next day, Nathaniel went to the meeting at his company. He adjusted his tie and remembered Elijah's words, "Show them who you are." The board meeting began, and Nathaniel knew the battle was just starting. But no matter what happened, he was already the richest man in the world because of his family. Nathaniel Stone, the leader of a big famous company, was standing in a big fancy meeting room. Around him were important people, the company's board members. Some of them didn't like him anymore. They thought his life outside of work wasn't good for the company. A man named Mr. Montgomery, one of the board members, wanted Nathaniel fired as the boss. But Nathaniel wasn't scared. He had a plan, and he wasn't going to let anyone push him around. The room was tense. People were whispering and giving Nathaniel sharp looks. Montgomery stood up and started listing all the reasons why Nathaniel should step down. "Nathaniel's personal life is bad for the company's image," Montgomery said loudly. Beatrice, Nathaniel's sister, rolled her eyes but stayed quiet. She believed in her brother. Nathaniel listened calmly. Then, when it was his turn, he stood up. He looked around the room, meeting everyone's eyes one by one. "Let's talk about the company's image," he said, his voice calm but strong. "Last night, I received something very interesting." He clicked a button and a big screen lit up with an email. The email was from Diana Chen, a famous journalist for the New York Times. Diana was also Charlotte's best friend. Charlotte was Nathaniel's partner, the woman he loved, and they had been through a lot together recently. The email told a shocking story. Diana had discovered that some people in the company were being treated unfairly. "My family has been hurt by gossip and bullying," Nathaniel said, his voice heavy with emotion. "But while some of you were busy spreading rumors about my life, Diana was uncovering the truth about our company. She found that we've been rejecting talented workers just because they don't fit a certain image. Most promotions go to white men, even though our employees are diverse. This isn't right, and it's not what this company should stand for." The room went silent. Some people looked uncomfortable. Mr. Montgomery, on the other hand, looked angry. "This is blackmail," he shouted, standing up. "No, Mr. Montgomery," Beatrice said firmly. "This is justice." The discussion went on for hours. People argued back and forth, some defending Nathaniel, others siding with Montgomery. But Nathaniel stood his ground. He answered every accusation with facts and proof. During a break, Nathaniel got a text from Charlotte. It was a picture of her kids, the twins, holding a trophy from their school science fair. Her message said, "Did you see this? Today is Nathaniel-y Day." The picture gave Nathaniel the strength to keep going. He thought about what Oliver, Charlotte's second oldest son, had told him the night before. Sometimes losing something can mean winning something bigger. Finally, the votes were counted. The secretary of the board stood up and said, "By 8 votes to 4, the board has decided to keep Nathaniel Stone as CEO of Blackwood Enterprises." Montgomery stood up abruptly, his face pale with anger, and stormed out of the room. His allies followed him. The remaining board members started congratulating Nathaniel. Some looked genuinely relieved, while others were clearly just trying to stay on his good side now that he had won. Nathaniel didn't care about their opinions. He had fought for what was right, and he had won. Not just for himself, but for everyone who deserved better. Later that night, Nathaniel went to Charlotte's apartment in the Bronx. It was small and cozy, filled with laughter and love. The family celebrated his Nathaniel-y Day with pizza and soda. Nathaniel sat back, watching Charlotte and her kids laugh and joke around. Charlotte's youngest son, Luna, was trying to convince her to let them get a pet. "How about a dog?" Luna asked. "No way," Charlotte replied quickly, making everyone laugh. "Maybe a fish?" Nathaniel suggested, trying to help. "Only if it's a shark," Luna said, completely serious. Nathaniel laughed, feeling a deep warmth in his chest. He realized that keeping his job wasn't the most important thing. This family, his family, was what mattered most. 3 months later, Nathaniel decided it was time to take the next big step. He wanted to ask Charlotte to marry him. But first, he needed to talk to Elijah, Charlotte's oldest son. One afternoon, Nathaniel took Elijah to a small cafe after school. Elijah was a teenager, but he was mature beyond his years. He had taken on a lot of responsibility after his dad, Henry, had passed away. Nathaniel took a deep breath. "Elijah, I need to ask you something important," he began. "I love your mom, and I love being part of this family. I want to ask her to marry me. But I wanted to talk to you first." Elijah looked at his hot chocolate, thinking carefully. "Our dad was a hero," he said quietly. "He died saving people. For a long time, I didn't think anyone could ever take his place." Nathaniel nodded. "I don't want to take your dad's place. I could never do that. I just want to be there for you, your brothers, and your mom in my own way." Elijah smiled a little. "That's why we trust you. You never tried to be our dad. You just tried to be yourself. That means a lot to us." He showed Nathaniel a photo on his phone. It was of Nathaniel helping Julian, the third brother, with his homework. "You made math fun for Julian. He said you explained it like a detective story. That's what makes you different." Nathaniel felt a lump in his throat. "You all mean so much to me," he said. Elijah nodded. "Okay, You have my blessing. But I need to ask you something. Are you ready to be a dad to 5 kids? Nathaniel laughed nervously. Honestly, it's a little scary, but I've never wanted anything more in my life. Elijah grinned. Good answer. Together, Elijah and Nathaniel planned a treasure hunt to make the proposal special. The next morning, Charlotte woke up to find a rolled-up map on her bedside table. It was tied with a blue ribbon, her favorite color. The map led her to different places in the city that were meaningful to her and Nathaniel. At the Metropolitan Museum of Art, Julian gave her a golden scarab with a riddle inside. Nathaniel taught me about scarabs, he said excitedly. They mean transformation. At a little coffee shop near Lincoln Center, the twins handed her a puzzle they had built themselves. Oliver, who loved drawing and design, had made the map, which was full of clever details. Finally, the last clue led her to the conservatory garden in Central Park. Nathaniel was waiting there by a fountain. He wore a sharp navy blue suit, but his eyes were soft and full of love. Around the garden, Charlotte's kids were waiting, each holding a blue rose. A string quartet played a soft, beautiful song. Nathaniel stepped forward. Charlotte, he began, his voice trembling just a little, before I met you, I was successful, but I didn't have meaning in my life. I had a house, but it wasn't a home. You and your incredible kids have taught me what family really means. One by one, the kids came forward and handed Charlotte their roses. Elijah was the first, followed by Oliver, then the twins, and finally Julian, who also carried a small velvet box. Nathaniel took the box and knelt down. This ring belonged to my grandmother, he said. She was a strong, loving woman, just like you. Charlotte Anderson, will you marry me and let us officially become a family? Charlotte looked at her children. Each of them was smiling, their faces full of hope and love. Tears filled her eyes as she nodded. Yes, she said, her voice shaking with emotion. The garden filled with cheers. The kids rushed to hug their mom and Nathaniel. They were laughing, crying, and celebrating all at once. That night, back at the apartment, the family had a simple dinner together. The boys were already talking about the wedding and teasing Nathaniel about what kind of cake they should have. Luna still hadn't given up on the idea of getting a shark as a pet. Nathaniel sat back, watching his family. For the first time in his life, he felt truly at home. He realized that no business deal, no amount of money could ever compare to the love he felt in that moment. Elijah nodded with tears in his eyes, while Oliver smiled widely. The twins couldn't sit still. They were so excited. Julian looked as happy as a person could ever be. Yes, she said with a shaky voice full of feelings. 1,000 times yes! Nathaniel carefully slid the ring onto her finger. As he did, a string quartet began playing a soft and beautiful version of What a Wonderful World. Julian couldn't hold back her happiness anymore. She ran to hug them both, one after the other. The rest of the boys quickly joined in, and they all hugged together. It was a moment none of them would ever forget. Can we get a dog now? Zara asked, his eyes hopeful. Everyone laughed through their happy tears. Not yet, Charlotte and Nathaniel said together, sharing a grin. Maybe we can get a fish, Nathaniel added with a wink. As long as it's not a shark, Charlotte teased, pulling her family close. The Blackwood mansion on Beacon Hill had been empty for almost 10 years since Nathaniel's parents had passed away. Only a few staff members had come and gone to keep the place clean and tidy. Now, on a sunny Sunday afternoon, the huge house was full of laughter and running feet. This place is huge, Julian shouted, his voice echoing in the entrance hall. Can we play hide and seek here? No running in the house, Charlotte said, but even she was amazed by the house's fancy details from over 100 years ago. Nathaniel led the family on a tour, watching each person's face light up with wonder. The move to the mansion had been a big decision. Their small apartment in the Bronx was full of happy memories, but it had become too crowded for the growing family. This was my father's library, Nathaniel said as he opened 2 large wooden doors. Oliver ran straight to the tall bookshelves, her fingers brushing over the old books. "Look at this, Mom," she said, pulling out a dusty book. "It's a first edition of the history of medieval architecture." The twins, meanwhile, were more excited about what they found upstairs. "A laboratory?" Zara said, staring at the equipment in amazement. "With real tools," Luna added, checking out the shiny microscopes. "And blast-proof walls," Nathaniel said with a smile, making Charlotte laugh. Elijah, the oldest, stayed quiet. He watched everything carefully, taking it all in. Later, Nathaniel found him in an old office, holding a photo of Nathaniel's parents. "Your parents?" Elijah asked. "Yes," Nathaniel replied, stepping closer. "They would have loved to meet you, especially my mom. She was a teacher who loved books." Elijah stared at the photo. "Do you think they'd approve of us?" Nathaniel thought about it before answering. "My parents didn't always make the best choices. They grew up in a different time. But they taught me one thing. Family is the most important thing in the world. And you, your brothers, and your mom, you're my family now." Their talk was interrupted by shouting from outside. "Nathaniel, Julian is climbing the fountain." When they ran outside, they found Julian soaking wet and laughing while Oliver tried not to laugh too loudly. "I just wanted to see the dolphins up close," Julian explained, dripping water. "They're newts, darling," Charlotte said with a smile, wrapping him in a towel. That evening, they all sat on the floor in the empty living room. The furniture wasn't arriving until next week, so they shared pizza, just like they always did on family nights. "So," Zara said, wiping sauce from her chin, "about that dog?" "Not yet," Charlotte and Nathaniel said together, making everyone laugh. "Maybe we can start smaller," Nathaniel teased. Just then, Nathaniel's sister, Beatrice, walked in, holding a box with tiny holes in it. Little meow sounds came from inside. "Kittens!" Julian shouted, jumping up and down. The family met their two new pets, one black kitten and one orange kitten. The twins immediately started arguing about names. "Nikola and Tesla," Zara finally declared, and everyone agreed it was perfect. Elijah gently held the black kitten. "You've really thought about everything, haven't you?" he asked Nathaniel. "I'm trying," Nathaniel said. "I want this to feel like home." Elijah nodded. "Home isn't about the place, it's about the people." Charlotte sat beside them and smiled. "Everything okay?" she asked Elijah. Elijah gave her a big, rare smile. "Yeah, I think it'll be nice to finally have enough space for everyone. Maybe now the twins can blow stuff up without shaking the whole building." "Hey!" the twins said together, but they were grinning. The next day, the family prepared for the wedding rehearsal dinner. The kitchen was buzzing with activity. Beatrice managed the caterers, while the twins kept sneaking tastes of chocolate desserts. "Zara, Luna, leave the sweets alone," Charlotte called. In the living room, she adjusted Julian's bow tie for the third time. "But it itches," Julian whined, pulling at his collar. Nathaniel laughed as Elijah walked up, looking serious. "Can we talk?" Elijah asked. They went to Nathaniel's office, where Elijah took a deep breath. "Tomorrow at the wedding," he said, "can I give the speech as best man?" Nathaniel's heart skipped a beat. He had planned for his old friend Gabriel to do it, but hearing this from Elijah meant so much more. "Are you sure?" Nathaniel asked gently. "It's a big responsibility." "I'm sure," Elijah said. "You've been more than just my mom's boyfriend. You've become family." Before Nathaniel could respond, there was a loud crash from the kitchen, followed by the twins shouting, "It wasn't our fault!" Nathaniel and Elijah ran to the kitchen. "The fire extinguisher was in the wrong place," the twins argued. After fixing the chaos, Elijah pulled an envelope from his pocket. "It's a letter from my dad," he explained. "He wrote one for each of us before his last mission. Mine said to open it when I found someone who could take care of our family." Nathaniel's hands shook as he held the letter. "Read it later," Elijah said with a smile. "Right now, we need to stop the twins from blowing up the house." That night, the family gathered for dinner. The kids caused their usual mischief, spilled drinks, lost rings, and an attempt to fix the sound system. But in the end, everyone settled down. Nathaniel found a quiet moment with Charlotte in the garden. "Nervous?" he asked, holding her hand. "A little," she admitted. "It's a big change for all of us." "But a good change," Nathaniel said, smiling, "even if our new home insurance has to cover science experiments now." Charlotte laughed. "And kittens." "Yes," Nathaniel said, pulling her close. "And kittens." Charlotte laughed and leaned her head on Nathaniel's shoulder. Who would have thought that the great Nathaniel Stone would end up with a family like this? Nathaniel smiled, watching Julian dig in the garden with his archaeology kit. A family with two mad scientists in training, a young archaeologist, and even a future architect, he said. Charlotte pointed to Oliver, who was showing his drawings to Alina and Elijah. "And a very serious architect," she added with a laugh. Nathaniel touched the envelope in his pocket and paused. "What about Elijah?" he asked quietly. "He said yes," Charlotte replied softly. "He agreed to be your best man tomorrow." Nathaniel's eyes widened. "You know what that means, right? It means Elijah has finally accepted all of us." Charlotte's eyes filled with happy tears, but before she could respond, the twins shouted from the garden, "We did it! The lights are dancing!" Everyone turned to see the garden lights flashing in all kinds of patterns, perfectly matching the music playing in the background. "Should we be worried?" Nathaniel asked, half laughing and half concerned. "Probably," Charlotte said with a grin. "But honestly, I wouldn't want our life to be any other way." The evening was full of fun, laughter, and lots of talking. The twins promised to keep things safe, even though they always seemed to find trouble. Nathaniel looked around and smiled. This was his family now. Not just Charlotte, but all of them. Later, after everyone had gone home and the kids were asleep, Nathaniel finally opened the letter in his pocket. It was from Henry, Charlotte's first husband, someone Nathaniel had never met. Nathaniel's hands shook a little as he read. "To whoever finds this letter, if you're reading this, it means my oldest son has found someone special. Someone who loves not just Charlotte, but our whole family with all its craziness. Take care of them, love them, and let them love you back. There is no greater gift in the world." Nathaniel wiped his eyes and folded the letter carefully. Tomorrow wasn't just about marrying Charlotte. It was about officially joining a family that had already welcomed him long ago. The next morning, the Metropolitan Museum opened early just for the wedding. The Egyptian hall, where Charlotte and Nathaniel had first met, had been turned into a magical place. Blue and white flowers decorated the room, glowing softly under the lights. In one room, Charlotte adjusted her beautiful wedding dress. It was simple yet stunning, just like her. Julian, already dressed in his tiny tuxedo, stared at her in awe. "You look like a real Egyptian queen, Mom," he said. "Cleopatra would be jealous," Oliver added with a proud smile as he came in. Meanwhile, in another room, Nathaniel was getting ready. Elijah stood in front of him, fixing his tie. "The twins just ran past," Nathaniel said nervously. "Please tell me they haven't blown anything up." Elijah smirked. "Not yet, but it's a long day." Nathaniel laughed, but still looked anxious. Elijah stopped and looked at him seriously. "You know," he said, "when Mom first told us about you, I thought you'd be like everyone else, someone who'd leave the moment things got crazy. But you stayed. You didn't just stay. You became part of us." Nathaniel swallowed hard. "Before you guys, I had a house, not a home. I had people working for me, but not a family." Elijah smiled and pulled out a photo. It was an old picture of Henry in his military uniform, standing with the 5 kids when they were younger. "Julian found this yesterday," Elijah said. He said, "We need a new photo now, with all of us in it." Nathaniel's eyes filled with tears, but before he could say anything, Zara and Luna burst into the room. "It's time. And no, we haven't touched anything explosive." The ceremony began. The twins came down the aisle first, carrying the rings very carefully. Oliver followed, proudly holding Elena's hand. Then Julian walked in, tossing flower petals everywhere with perfect precision. Finally, the music changed, and Charlotte appeared. Nathaniel's heart felt like it stopped. She looked more beautiful than he had ever seen her. Elijah walked beside her, leading her down the aisle with a proud smile. But instead of handing his mom over to Nathaniel right away, Elijah surprised everyone by giving a speech. "When I lost my dad," Elijah said clearly, "I thought our family would never feel whole again. But I was wrong. Family isn't about replacing someone. It's about making more space for love." He turned to Nathaniel. "You didn't try to take my dad's place. You made your own place in our hearts. You made Zara and Luna love science even more, even if it means fixing the house sometimes. You showed Oliver that his big dreams matter. You gave Julian the confidence to follow her love for history, and you taught me it's okay to love again." Elijah then took his mom's hand and placed it in Nathaniel's. "So today, I'm not just giving my mom away. I'm welcoming you into our crazy, loud, sometimes messy family." There wasn't a single dry eye in the room. Later, during the vows, Nathaniel turned to the kids first. "Zara and Luna, I promise to always help with your experiments, even when it means cleaning up a mess. Oliver, I promise to believe in your big dreams and help you build them. Julian, I promise to take you on adventures and tell you bedtime stories every night. Elijah," he paused, his voice shaking, "thank you for trusting me. I promise to honor that trust." Finally, he looked at Charlotte. "And to you, my love, I promise a lifetime of laughter, adventure, and love. Not just from me, but from all of us." When the officiant announced them husband and wife, the room burst into cheers. And of course, there was a small, colorful explosion of confetti, thanks to the twins. "It wasn't an explosion," Zara explained later at the reception. "It was a controlled release of energy." Charlotte just laughed and hugged the twins. "Don't ever change, my little scientists." The party lasted all night. It wasn't just a wedding. It was a celebration of a new, extraordinary family. And if anyone noticed the lights flashing in weird patterns again, well, that was just another funny thing about the Blackwood Williams family. Thank you for watching. If you liked this story and want to see more, please subscribe to our channel. That way you won't miss any new videos. Give us a thumbs up if you enjoyed it and share what you think in the comments. We love hearing your thoughts. Also, don't forget to check out the other videos on our channel. We'll see you in the next story.